Today we have more implicit differentiation, but now we'll be using the product rule in our implicit differentiation. So find dy dx by implicit differentiation. So for number 1, we have x cubed plus xy plus y squared equals 4. Okay. So we're going to go through term by term and do the derivative, but when we get to this middle term, since it's a variable times another variable, an x times a y, this is where we're going to have to do our product rule. So this will be f, and that will be g. So when I get to this part, I'm going to have to do f times g prime plus f prime times g. So I'm going to just start with the 3x cubed. With the x cubed, and that'll become 3x squared, so this is just the regular derivative. Then plus, when I do this derivative, I'm going to have to do f times g prime plus f prime times g. So for f, we have x, so the derivative of that for f prime, that's just going to be 1. Then for g, I have y, so g prime is just going to be 1, but I took the derivative of a y, so dy dx. So this is what I'll be using for the product rule for this term. Okay, so my first part is f times g prime, so that's x times 1, so that would just be 1x, and then I've got to keep the dy dx, I just always put it at the end. So this part was my fg prime. Then plus, now I have to do f prime times g, so that's 1 times y, so that'll just be a y. Okay, so that's this part right here. Now I have the derivative of y squared. Well, that's just regular power rule, so that'll be 2y dy dx equals the derivative of 4 is going to be 0. Okay, so now when you're doing implicit differentiation with the product rule, not every single y is going to have a dy dx with it anymore. Okay, because this one right here, this was f prime times g. So this was just the regular equation for g. It didn't have a dy dx with it because we hadn't taken the derivative of it. Okay, so now you won't have a dy dx necessarily with every single y term. But then from here, the process is the same. I'm going to take my two terms that don't have a dy dx and move them to the other side. So that will be negative 3x squared minus y. And then these two terms that have a dy dx, I'm going to leave them on the left, but I'm going to take the dy dx out of them. And then to solve, I'm just going to divide by the x plus 2y. So dy dx will be negative 3x squared minus y over x plus 2y. So for our next example, we have 2x squared minus xy minus 3xy squared equals 8. So now we're going to have to do the product rule 2 times. Once for this term, since I have minus x times y, and once for this term, since I have minus 3x times y squared. So I'll have to do a product rule for each of these. Okay, but I'm going to start with the 2x squared. That would just be 4x. Then when I do this one, you're going to include the negative with f. So that'll be negative x for f, y for g. So for that first one, f is negative x, so f prime is negative 1. G is y, so g prime is 1 dy dx. And then I've got to take this stuff for this term and plug it in to the product rule. So here's my product rule. So I'll have 4x and then f times g prime, that's negative x times 1, so that'll be a minus 1x dy dx So this part's my f g prime, then plus f prime times g, that's negative 1 times y. So that would just be plus a negative y, which would be minus y. And that part will take care of my f prime g for this part. Okay. Now it's time to do the derivative of this term. So we're going to have to do the product rule again. So this will be a different product rule from this one. So for that second one, my f is going to be negative 3x. So my f prime is negative 3. My g is y squared. So g prime is 2y, but tack on the dy dx since we took the derivative of something with a y. Okay. And now we'll have to do a second product rule for this term. Okay. So then continuing from here, next I'll add the fg prime. So that is negative 3x times 2y. So that will be negative 6xy dy dx. Then plus f prime times g, so negative 3 times y squared would just be plus a negative 3y squared, so minus 3y squared, and then equals, don't forget after all of that to take the derivative of the right side, which would just be 0. And then from here, I'm going to move all my dy dx's to one side and everything else to the other side. So since both of my dy dx's are negative, I'm going to go ahead and move them to the right. So I'm going to leave the 4x, the minus y, the minus 3y squared. I'm going to move both of these over, so that will make it x and a plus 6xy. And then I'm just going to GCF that dy dx out of both of them, so just bring it to the front. Then our last step is just to divide by the x plus 6xy. So dy dx is going to equal 4x minus y minus 3y squared over x plus 6xy. Now, if you had taken this problem and kept the dy dx's on the left side and moved everything else, then your answer would have had the same coefficients, just with the opposite signs. So if this is what you got instead, these are the same answer. So if your answer has the same variables with the same coefficients, just the opposite signs for all of them, that answer is also okay. Now let's look at a couple trig ones. So I have 2y minus 4y cosine of x equals x squared. So for this term right here, okay, this one we don't have to do product rule because the 2 doesn't have an x or a y with it. But here, since the coefficient also has a y with it, we now have a y times something with an x. So we're going to have to do product rule for this derivative. So again, you're just going to go term by term. So for sine, that's just a regular derivative. So that'll just be 2 cosine of y, but I took the derivative of something with a y. So I need to multiply it by dy dx at the end. Then for the product rule for this one, f is going to be negative 4y. So f prime is negative 4. G is going to be cosine of x, and sorry, I left the dy dx off on this one. I took the derivative of a y right here, so I need to multiply it by a dy dx for the derivative. And then g prime is going to be negative sine of x. Okay, then I'll just take all of this, plug it into my product rule. So f times g prime, that's negative 4y times negative sine of x. So that'll end up being a positive 4y sine of x. Okay, so that's the f g prime. Then we're going to do plus f prime times g, so that's negative 4 times cosine, so that'll be minus 4 cosine of x, and then I always just tack the dy dx onto the end. Okay, so then that's this term, and now we have to do the derivative of x squared, which is 2x. Okay. Then I'm going to leave these two over here, and I'm going to go ahead and take out the dy dx. So that'll give me 2 cosine of y minus 4 cosine of x. This term doesn't have a dy dx, so I'm going to move it over with the 2x. So anytime you move something to the other side, it's going to change signs. Then just divide by this. So dy dx will be 2x minus 4y sine of x all over 2 cosine of y minus 4 cosine of x. Okay. Now if we look at this one, all 4 terms are divisible by 2, so this is one where I need to divide everything by 2. So that'll be x minus 2y sine of x over cosine of y minus 2 cosine of x. Now let's look at one last one. So we've got sine of x times cosine of y. So we're going to have to do product rule here, and the rest of them are just regular. So this will be my f, that will be my g. So f of x is sine of x. F prime is cosine of x. G is cosine of y. So g prime is going to be negative sine of y. And since I took the derivative and it has a y, I multiply it by dy dx at the end. So then our product rule here, okay, f times g prime, that's sine of x times negative sine of y. So that'll just be negative sine of x, sine of y, dy dx. Okay, you can't multiply these signs together because one is a sine of x and one is a sine of y, so they stay separate. So this is f g prime, then plus f prime times g, so that's cosine of x, cosine of y. Again, I can't multiply them together because they have different variables. Then minus 2y, so this is just regular derivative. That'll be dy dx equals derivative of 2x is 2, derivative of y is 1. Tack on a dy dx. Okay. So I'm going to take these two, move them to the other side. Okay. So I'm going to leave the cosine of x, cosine of y. I am going to move this 2 over since it doesn't have a dy dx. Okay. Then I'm going to leave my 1 dy dx. I'm going to add the sine of x times sine of y, and I'm also going to add the 2y. Okay, and then I'm just going to write the dy dx outside of the, and then my last step is just to divide by this. So you'll have cosine of x, cosine of y minus 2 over 1 plus sine of x, sine of y plus 2y. Okay. And you can't reduce it by anything, so this would be your final answer. Okay. And again, if your terms are in a different order, that's fine. And also, if all of your terms have the opposite sign, like if you moved all the dy's to the left and everything else to the right, you're going to have the opposite signs of all of these. That answer would also be okay.